Okay, let's start from FQL, yes.
So I guess I'll start just to give the more low-level intro. And then Martijn is the real inventor here. So he'll take it over for me and is able to answer all the questions. Josh asked us to start from this example that Dan made before, where he has a bunch of observations in NDJSON and is pulling out only the blood pressure observations, and from those, from the different components, some variables. So that's what we started with. So I took all the NDJSON, split that into some separate JSON files, and put that into a simplifier project. So you can just create a free simplifier account, create a free public project. I dumped all the different observations in here. So I have these 6,315 observations. We can browse around. There's many different types of observations, blood pressures in here. Yeah, you can see all the visualizations and stuff. So that's your simplifier project with all the resources in there. I added one patient just to show that we can also go cross resource boundaries. And then, yeah, so we're using the FHIR query language. We used to call it FHIR query language because we didn't want to presume this to be a community standard with just us building this. But now there's some interest. I guess we rebranded to the FHIR query language. Luckily, the abbreviation stays the same. This project, I can put this in the chat if you want to play around with it. Mm-hmm. And so on any project on Simplifier or on a package, you can always go to the query option here and open this one in the FQL playground. And in the FQL playground, you can just select any scope. You can also just look at the core FHIR spec, for example, and say, okay, give me all the structure definitions and these types out of it. So FQL is very SQL-ish, but then over FHIR resources. And yeah, maybe I should directly just dive into the query that we try to mimic the one from Dan here. So that's this big button here, where we say, okay, from observations, so out of this scope. And currently this is only looking within the project itself. We also have other scopes that you can define with the using statements. You can also use all the dependency resources, for example. But in this case, we're just looking at the project, take all the observations, and out of those, select those where they are blood pressure observations, basically. And then from those, select the ID. And then we try to stay as close to Dan's example here as possible with all the naming and stuff. Patient reference, not patient ID. I'll come back to that. The effective date, so you can use this kind of renaming of your columns. And then we do some FHIR path-based selections here of the different components. So select this component where it has a system and code matching to our values. Josh made a valid comment that this is probably not the best FHIR path query because I think you can, Dan was using one with an AND statement, but we can comment on that one before later. But then out of that component, so select that component, and within that, so we use this little bracket notation. Within that, select the system code unit value, and also with the other one. And so here we have all the different values that Dan also had in his overview. We have a small bug now on the playground. It's fixed next release, but if you get the share link, you cannot scroll down. So just execute it again, and you can still see all the different observations here.
So, Ward, is that making like an alias? Patient under bar reference is the path. Okay,
exactly.
Yeah. Have you changed the syntax? Because previously what Josh showed, it was like a nest or join, something like this. Some keyword was added when you go inside.
There are, and I must say, I keep playing around always a bit with using the for or the join or the brackets, and keep forgetting which one exactly I need to get what. But there is different options. So the docs are here. Martijn, you can comment on this, of course, if you want.
Yeah, in this particular case, there's no need to join anything because you want a single row.
So because you're expecting single row. If there are multiple results, so then it should be joined. Yes.
Yes, but then you will have duplication in the left set of columns. Like, you know, it will be basically when you join with the subfields of the resource itself, it's most logical to have a left join. Right, because otherwise, if you do an inner join, you just ignore the fields that you originally had.
But if you have two joins on the same level, it's going to be cross join, all possible combinations. Or
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's many visualizations possible. I could imagine for analysis, it might even be more useful to not have these components side by side, but say like have two rows for diastolic and systolic or something. Both should be completely possible.
And is it your engine limitation why you could not say where and at least or nested where in when you're selecting component?
Yeah, that's a good question, Martijn. I was just trying to ask you.
Yeah, I think there's several things here. So first of all, I have not been updating the latest version of FHIR for a while. So I think those and or statements are a bit newer. I just played around with this morning, and it seems like I can just add them without any further complication. But I think there's another part, and that is when you do this where clause, of course, you want to have a paired matching, right? So you want to have the same coding having a loink.org system and the coding of -9.
That's usually done with a nested where expression.
Yeah. And so that might be done in FHIR, I'm not completely sure, but we will probably have to make this mature enough. You will have to probably add some syntax there.
Yeah, I think Dan was doing it this way.
Yeah, sure, but I think we can make it cleaner eventually.
And maybe, so this is just showing it on our web platform on Simplifier. One thing I cannot show here because we have not implemented that online is the fetch statement where, so you'll see here that I deliberately named this subject reference, patient reference, because we're not pulling out the ID, but we can actually, so if anywhere where something returns a reference, I could just, and I will type it here, but it will not work here. So here I'll return a reference. So then I can say fetch, and then I go basically into that linked resource, and then from there I can select the ID. This is by memory. Well, I guess that's
yeah. Well, you don't even need to select. You can just say ID or a group of fields.
Okay. And to show that, let me go to the command line here. So here I have this is visible at all. I have this little query.txt where I do that little fetch here. So subject.reference fetch, and then patient ID is ID. And I can run that with FHIR terminal here, where I just say FHIR, which is the command line, FHIR terminal command line, query is the command, and then I pass in file. I can also just directly pass in a FHIR path, an FQL query, and then it will run through all those resources. And right now I've only added one patient, which is linked to one specific observation. So yeah, you see only for one, it returns the ID here. And I guess the name would have been more interesting, but I guess you'll believe me that this is an actual.
I actually have an example if needed.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And this right now I'm just outputting it as a table directly here, but we can just give many different output formats like JSON or XML or an HTML table. Yeah. Yeah, that's as far as I got. Martijn, do you want to take it over? Want to show more from here? Or?
Well, I can, of course, I can tell a lot, but I think it's most relevant if we just focus on what the needs are for this group.
Yeah, so what I understood from Josh, just speaking on Zulip a bit, is that the idea was that this might fit into the view layer of SQL on FHIR, where you want to define some formalism to get from FHIR resources into SQL tables. Okay.
I think the most important is probably to discuss the limitations of FQL. So one is because FQL is basically based on FHIR path evaluation, you will need the whole resource structured in memory in order to execute it, and that means that it's slow if you do it over the wire, right? You need all the data in order to evaluate. But from what I saw, the tooling that you're currently using has the same limitation. In these examples, we just ran them over the raw JSON files, so that's why it's a little bit slower. We have faster implementations, and well, we are working on several faster implementations. You know, it of course becomes faster if you have proper indexing. But since you can do a where clause basically on anything, you will always have the limitation that you will need to evaluate the expression in order to, you know, to filter out the query, filter out the result.
Yeah, I can explain, guys, what are we interested in. So for now, we're discussing what's called view definition. The goal of this view definition, it's heavily based on FHIR path as well. So, and yeah, if you open the then example, so
yeah, let me.
What we're discussing, yeah, and we designing this logic of unnesting and cross join when you try to flatten the recursive data structure. Yeah, we're discussing the semantic and syntax, how it should be done. And Josh bring to us your design decision in FQL, and that what was the interest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the language syntax more than your specific engine implementation to try and see how you solve some of the similar problems.
Yeah. Well, Bart, this is your screen, right?
Yeah, it is.
Can you maybe go to the documentation of FQL and open up the part about unnesting? Yeah, so the simplest form of unnesting is just dotting into them, but then you have unpaired matches. And if you want to pair them, you use what we call group unwrapping by just, you know, bracket over them so that you get them paired. But that still is, that can of course give an array, right? Because that's the nature of FHIR path. And so to limit that, you can either do name dot first, select name dot first and then the brackets. Or if you want a cross join, you can use the field join as yeah, there.
But by default, if I do like name given and name family, what's gonna happen? Are they cross join if we
no,
have?
you will just get an array back. So
array of given, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the core of FQL, of course, not flattening anything. It's just your choice how to flatten stuff.
Yeah, but
So
let's say if I select ID and then name family and then name given, what will happen?
In case of more values, you will just get a structure. Maybe you can show that Bart on the command line. Well, you can see it a little bit here. This basically, the structure that you see here is a tree which starts with a root called table, I think, and then columns or rather nodes called row, and then you can nest as deep as you want. So if FQL in essence is just a tree rewriter, but it provides or tries to provide the tools to actually flatten them if you wish to.
Mm-hmm. But you're still doing cross join, or it is not cross join.
Well, yeah, we just
ID and the FHIR path expression, which is Rita.
Yeah, so if you would do a join on name.given, you would get a cross join.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we can work through a specific example that might clarify things. So I'm using the patient name. Suppose one use case that I think we had come up with is, well, that's analogous to this, is if we have a query that creates a flattened table of names, so there's a column for the given name, there's a column for the first name, but joined together, so it's just one string, and then a column for the use column, and there's one row per name, so each patient can produce multiple rows. Is it possible to express that using this query syntax? And if so, I'd love to kind of understand how it's done. By the way, overall, I see quite I really quite like this structure, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. I'm just kind of understand the semantics a little bit better.
So talk me through it.
Yeah, so let's start with a select and then an ID,
If
and
have
then
patience.
And then
Yeah.
name. For example.
yeah, and then
We have some patience.
Yeah, I dropped, I think, Ryan, is this similar to the example you were mentioning? I dropped the one I put in the chat earlier this week, which is like expanding across name and identifier.
yeah, so here,
Yeah,
here-
actually that.
so here you can clearly see that the name.given produces an array, and in this visualizer we just parse or put arrays with a semicolon for every node or for every value.
If we start with a name, just name without given, so what?
Yeah.
We will
Then
get an array of names. Yes.
Yeah, you just get a structure back. So you will not see here anything because it's too complex to render.
Okay.
But it's a structure. And if you would do a join, then you will actually get multiple values for the same ID for each name. What can you show that?
Yeah, good. I can only type so fast. Yeah.
So join on name.given, for example.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if you do the on next line join name dot family, what will happen?
It will just produce a cross of the first and the second.
Okay.
A comma. You're missing a comma.
Commas, yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, actually, this one has a good example from the
Not
looks of
much.
it. So.
Not the
So
most
you-
useful.
So you see, there's a repetition of Van der Giesen for Johanna, Petra, Manella, and Maria. So I think here you see good example of a cross join.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But doing left join, we should go inside name, yes, and open the square bracket.
So if you do join, so you
Mhm.
now see that the givens are still an array, but you can also do a join on them. So can you say join given?
Yeah, and so for a little bit of context on some of the things that we're looking to solve here as well is this, create a view, a definition of flattened FHIR that works well with a popular analytic tools, whether it's just a business intelligence engine or a data frame or something like that. And so kind of the reasoning we've been going through to kind of get through the behavior that we would think would be suitable is like, what does that sort of audience of users look for in FHIR data or in data in general? And so I think one pattern, one use case that we'd come up with, and I think that we're close to, maybe it is expressible here, so for example, if I'm looking for just a list of patient names, a lot of times the databases will, because they don't support like nested arrays, they may not support nested arrays in some cases at all. They might be interested in, hey, is there a way that the given names could be like appended into a space separated string? So you'd have a single row that says, Joanna, Petronella, Maria as the given name as one string. We had modeled that using the FHIR path, using the join function there, but yeah, I wonder, do you support that FHIR? So yeah, join, and okay, that'd be awesome.
That's
Well,
something like this.
I remember writing some kind of join at some point because I was missing it. I think I called it glue.
Okay, so that's basically doing exactly what I described. Perfect.
Yeah. So I've tried to put FHIR path wherever I could.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think this is, I like the semantics here quite a bit, and like for a discussion for the group. And one thing that this structure does is it seems to remove the need for distinct vars. Because right now we kind of had navigated this by creating a one section where we define like a set of variables that can be nested, and then another section where you define the columns. These two kind of effectively combines those together into more of a hierarchical structure, which I think has some appeal. But yeah, I think we need to digest it. But I'd love to hear from Dan, who just raised his hand.
Maybe there's one thing I can add about the variables. Of course, I have been considering in the past to add some intermediate variables with a let statement, but it doesn't seem to be necessary for the use cases that we had so far. And there's one reason I can show you. So if you now do go beyond the last line and you do another, no comma, just another select, Maybe you can give the first name, the given name, a name like first or given. Now, if you do in the next select, give a name. Yeah, as you can see, so the select is repetitive, and that allows for a reduction of boiler template. So you can also do a where at any place. Now you can do a where behind the last select or behind the first select, and that usually helps sufficiently in reducing boilerplate coding. On the other hand, of course, it's not always performant.
So you're reinventing the common table expressions, yeah?
Well, we try to be as practical as we can for our, mainly for analysis of users. Our users are usually interested in analyzing structure definitions and stuff.
Yeah, so I didn't want to take us off that because this is a little bit of a different direction. But I guess I was curious. So we've been talking a little bit about whether we can abstract some terminology type where clauses. So you'll notice, like in the BP example, because we're just doing USCDI and it's like, you know, two link codes, I just put them in line. But in a lot of other kind of real world cases, you might have, you know, 100 or 1,000 codes that you're looking up against. Have you guys run into that situation? And are there any sort of terminology semantics in FQL?
At least we can do like an in statement with FHIR, like where you give it an array. So.
Yeah, but we haven't worked with very large data sets yet.
So like could you join into like a value set or something like that? Or is that kind of out of scope for kind of what you've been handling?
Yeah, so what you can do, at least on the command line right now, and that's, we haven't built it into here for performance reasons. So you can do a fetch combined with a join. And then, you know, you can get just any column from other resource like you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the semantics that Dan's describing, at least for the use cases I've explored, would be achievable if there's like a where clause that supported the FHIR path member of function. So if you had an arbitrary value set and you could check for a member of there. So maybe that's just something that hasn't been implemented yet. It does seem like FHIR path itself has a pretty nice solution to that if we need to. And that, I think that's an area that we have been exploring in our early efforts as well.
I think the biggest problem is always the performance, because, you know, if I recall correctly, the member of is quite, you know, it's a very simple function, but below the waterline, it's a beast.
Yeah, Martin. So we have slightly different implementations. So, for example, guys, and we are trying to transpile this expression into SQL using modern databases which support nested data structures. So the performance may be not the problem in that case. So
yeah.
For us, we're trying to define the semantic and then build SQL queries using which support these semantics.
Yeah. Well, of course, at some level, FQL on a fundamental level cannot be transpiled into SQL because it allows a FHIR path statement anywhere. And so there, you already know that not every expression will be possible to be transpiled.
I think what we will get at the end is going to be some small subset of FQL with a bunch of limitations. But what I like about FQL that there is no difference between vars and columns, and this is represented through the nested query structure. Yes, and that's what we can exercise in our view definition. I shared some example, then as answer to you. So it looks like very similar to FQL. Yes, when you go just inside like nested, it maybe will look more ugly in JSON than in FQL, but we can survive. But,
it might be interesting. I mean, to see how well we can align these efforts. I think one thing that we could, honestly consider. Should we be building on FQL? Here, hard stop. And I think, maybe that'd be worth exploring. I think there's a few things that the flattened FHIR views are looking for, but maybe FQL could adopt in this direction. So some examples, like we want to be able to, define tables and databases and provide type hints to those tables, provide documentation strings to each column in those tables. And so there's quite a bit there that obviously hasn't made sense for the FQL space and the stuff it's done so far. And and I'm not sure if it ever would make sense in the FQL space. That said, if we had like a flattened FHIR view that follows similar semantics, maybe like that view definition could be translated into FQL and use this as a background in some cases. And so I think it would make sense to kind of align structurally whenever we can and see, and perhaps even go further beyond that. But I'm not sure, how far it makes sense to go down there, but it's worth exploring, it seems to me.
Yeah, that sounds good. I've already, after of course aligning with my boss and Wart, we are willing to explore how far we can make FQL available to the community or align with you or with Graham. So I think there's already a plan that we are going to talk to Graham about how and if to implement FQL on his IG publisher on, I think, Dev Days.
Yeah, and I guess Nikolai and Dan at least are also on site.
Okay, thank you guys.
Yes, thanks so much for coming by. Yeah, this is really nice, and definitely, if nothing else, a lot of great ideas here for the approach, and I think it was a good opportunity to figure out how we align going forward. So this is a really nice effort.
There was one question I had about your when many. So what exactly was that?
We have a lot of questions about that too. We're still figuring that piece out, but yeah, sorry, you were going to say something, Ryan.
Yeah. So no, I think that Dan hit it on the head. So essentially, when exploring these efforts, we had something that popped up fairly well for straightforward cases, but then the nature of the sort of bar structure had it pop up if we were doing like multiple, like essentially unrolling multiple sub selections, and those could lead into what felt like surprising cross join behaviors that seemed a little bit unintuitive from a user perspective, and we didn't really want somebody like to have like a surprise cross join that they didn't expect when authoring it. And so I think the when many, it was kind of a way to sort of manage that, so you'd explicitly declare when you wanted to cross join and when you wanted a nest and when you wanted an array. That said, I mean, my initial impression is that I think that the approach FQL is taking is potentially a better answer to that. It seems more clear to me, and doesn't. I mean, the semantics seem a bit more predictable than the stuff that we had sketched out with the when many behavior. So I think that maybe this is the follow-up discussion to have with this group, is to consider adapting whether we want to adapt similar semantics in the analytic view stuff.
Yeah, and just to add to that, real quick, I put an example of what I think our when many syntax would look like in the meeting chat. And in case you're interested in kind of seeing at least our current thinking in terms of like how that would.
I think the simple explanation. So in your case, to do the join, so you should add the join. Otherwise, it's going to be array. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's modifier is exactly what when many is trying to achieve. So when you say when many cross join, it will cross join. If when many, like you're expecting only one value, then the engine may fail.
So what you see a lot in with our customers, they use first a lot, or bracket 0.
That they try to achieve the goal as fast as possible. When the people will design the real analytic and other stuff, they should handle this nature of fire, that maybe not only first. And essentially we can align, I think our view definition semantically will be a subset of what you're trying to achieve. And you're telling that there's some performance problems because you allow a lot of fire path expression everywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe if you put some constraints, so then the FQL maybe transpile it into our view definition and backward. So we can discuss this if you agree with this constraints. So then we can potentially go together.
Sure.
Then view definition may become just IST for your, for your FQL.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, like I would expect that, like at least the way we're thinking about it now, like view definition would be a subset of FQL, so it could potentially compile into it, even if you can't go the other way necessarily.
Yeah.
If you do it other way, so then you will be able to use our advanced transpilers into SQL and run it in the scale.
These are all theoretical compilers.
They're getting real. I think they're
getting real.
We have two already almost implemented, yes, and now we're quite close with the Postgres as well. So I think next week I will present.
Cool.
I know from our other team at Firely that they did a lot in the structure of the database themselves in order to get fast data out of the regular FHIR server, and they usually do that mainly for FHIR search, right? For the search endpoint.
So I can tell our progress. So we close to Postgres implementation. For now, we almost start supporting vars through the lateral join, but for now we finished the FHIR pass transpiler into JSON pass. So I can run this. Maybe we can start from more simple version like this. Yeah. So you see that SQL was generated, the core piece that we were able to transpile FHIR pass to JSON pass. JSON pass is less powerful than FHIR pass, but for basic stuff, yeah, it works. Refresh. So now it's really run on Postgres. But the work in progress, yeah, we're gonna use lateral join for the vars or nested structure. So I hope next week, yeah, I will share the demo so everybody will be able to play with it. Yeah, the JSON pass will put some limitation. Potentially we can transpile in more complicated mix of SQL and JSON pass, but we will force more limitations on FHIR pass. As well, I have questions. So in the filter section, we have an array. Yes, what's the reason for that array? Because we can do combination using N and OR and grouping in FHIR pass. Why we decided to do an array? There's some use cases when we need an array.
I mean, so you're right. We could have combined it all in one big expression. So in like some early experiments and just like kind of like interactive builders and interactive executions, I found it was convenient if you have like one base to be able to sort of append conjunctions. So if I have like an interact section, it's like, oh, maybe I'm filtering it down to well, let's say blood pressure observations, and so I can create that view, and then maybe I just want to like add a constraint where you know, maybe I'll scope it to, you know, some either some well, where the value is greater than X or something like that. It's probably not the best example, but be able to sort of start with like a high level definition of some resource and be able to add conjunctions to zoom in on narrower scope. But that's purely a convenience. It's not really stronger semantically. And I think the other reason to have like a list of conjunctions there is we can add a bit of documentation describing each one, like in the expression. Yeah, whether either of those are like strongly justifies the additional complexity in the structure, I think is something of a judgment call. I think it makes sense to me, but if others have different perspectives, then I think that can be a completely open discussion of how much we want to include in terms of a list of conjunctions and documentation, as opposed to like one big FHIR path expression for the where clause.
Can we write an expression which you use two vars in a column section, or we will say that it's constrained? So can we combine two vars? I
don't know the answer to that. I think that maybe like our the more immediate consideration is like how much of the sort of FQL type model and structure do we want to adopt, which does not need the use of vars, and if that's the case, if that's the direction we do end up going, then that discussion is obviously no longer needed. But yeah, I think that I feel like maybe, I mean, we can talk about it a little bit now. I'd love to hear like sort of initial thoughts on considering adopting that. I don't think that there's any way we land on any conclusive decision in the 17 minutes we have left in this meeting. But I mean, I would be open to kind of considering like the FQL type pattern where we don't have a vars structure, because it seems like, or maybe the next step is to sort of pressure test that pattern against sort of the collective known use cases this group has seen, and see if it is sufficient for those use cases, and if so, then we can consider whether we want to adopt it. But yeah, I'll pause there. Like I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to hear thoughts from others on that as well.
A little fuzzy about like what that would look like. I'm wondering if we could if we could create some examples kind of using the current syntax and then the vars free kind of structure, and so that we can kind of look at them side by side, because I guess I'm still, I probably just need to work through some examples, but I'm still a little unclear how that would look.
I think it's a matter mostly of sugar, which we will try to add, because essentially we can just create the IST of FQL. It will look a little bit ugly, but yeah, you can just repeat this this logic, yes, like select section, and then go deeper at joins and all this stuff. So, or many. So I can try to sketch some examples. So I've tried, but I added a lot of sugar so that Ryan didn't understand what mean as and other stuff here.
Yeah, I'm tempted, and I'm willing to take a pass at this myself. I'm tempted to take a well, we have a few existing examples, like in the initial very draft spec, and I think that Dan, who just submitted the blood pressure one, I'd be willing to take a pass at like a translation of each one of those examples into the equivalent that would use an FQL like structure, but I mean would kind of, it would imply like a different vars free JSON structure, and we can see how well those map. I don't know if others want to, so I could take a pass at that, but if others are interested as well, or I guess we could all and then sort of compare, you know, what we came up with in that space. So maybe that would be a sort of a good objective to kind of work through over the next few days.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess I would also like to try like one of the more complicated cross-join examples, because I think that'll, like the ones in the spec are I think really good, but they're maybe a little bit simple, which makes it hard to kind of understand how much of a benefit we're getting or not getting from like converting, you know, moving away from kind of the variables as the way of kind of grouping or, you know, kind of creating kind of named subtables, basically, if you were to translate into SQL. There's
still a room for some constants, because when you're writing all these FHIR path expressions and long extension names, so they, kind of a lot of noise in expression. Yes, so it still would be nice to have something like constant section, which can be just replacement. Yes, like string replacement.
And I wonder, it's like those wells, like we might be able to eliminate a lot of that by kind of the nature of like the nested structure. So for example, in the FQL, the blood pressure example from FQL was excellent, and thanks so much for walking us through that. I mean, it wasn't necessary to repeat that same select criteria multiple times, because we selected the systolic ones and then got the columns from that, selected the diastolic ones and got the columns from that. So there was less boilerplate, which makes me wonder if I mean, and I agree with Dan and I agree with you, Nikolai, as well, that we need to test this against harder cases to make sure there isn't going to be surprising boilerplate. There very well could be, but yeah, I do wonder if we can not have the var section at all, because like the sort of like nested structure eliminates that boilerplate by itself. But I don't know the answer to that, and so maybe that's the thing we need to sort out.
So there's still a lot of open questions about daytime and all this stuff, yes, but so I think we still need to get into implementation to bring them and discuss in real life. I don't know, Ryan, was you able to start implementing all this stuff? Not yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, in my little so I do have like an implementation. Well, it's basically the same implementation we had that goes into much of this beforehand. I have not added the unnest semantics yet, because I was kind of wanting to work through this to figure out what the unnest semantics were. But when it comes to flattened, like one row per resource, it works fairly well. The pattern that we had used, I mean, it works, and it works quite nicely at scale. I mean, we can translate a pretty significant set of FHIR path into SQL, run it over like billions of rows in BigQuery, but it would similar behavior would apply to a lot of scalable database engines. So yeah, there's some promising things there for some of the edge cases. I do think we need to land on the exact semantics for. I mean, because most of our users that want to do analytics of FHIRs, like if you have a birth date field, like in many data sets, you have the full date, like basically every time. And so they really want to see a full date type in the database. And so I would love to, I do think that we should have some option for our view definitions to sort of annotate, that if somebody has a birth date column, say, hey, this is, we expect this to be a full date, and treat it as an error, or somehow handle it if there's not a full birth date in this for the purpose of the SQL views. Just because if I go to a bunch of data analysts that are expecting birth date to be an actual date, and I tell them no, it's a string, and sometimes it's only a year, they will not. They're not particularly pleased with that. So I do think we need to kind of work out what the best way to sort of have some option of declaring, hey, we expect this to be a full date, and similarly for the time types as well. But we need to figure out how to express that in the views.
Yeah, just today we discussed that should we use toDate in the FHIR path expression, or should we put type on a column definition? And so we end up that type on column definition looks a little bit more explicit, and you can use SQL types, not FHIR types. Yes, so.
Yeah, I'm inclined to have a type on the column definition as well, because the toDate FHIR path function, I actually, when I first looked at it, I didn't quite understand the semantics of it. I mean, it doesn't return a full date; it could still return like just the year, and so it doesn't quite match with what I had was aiming for. And then secondly, having a type definition, a type hint on the columns generalizes to other use cases, because there might be other databases where you want to give a type hint to say, hey, use a full decimal numeric type, so there's no precision loss and that sort of thing. So and sometimes there's varying trade-offs between databases there. So yeah, I think a type hint on a per column basis is probably the right answer for this, and it generalizes to other cases as well. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, we can take a pass at figuring what that might look like. That feels like the right direction to me.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we could consider is a way of kind of specifying a minimum precision. So saying something like, dot of, I don't know, make a function up, right? Like dot of precision, and then specify that. And then in SQL, that's a fairly straightforward translation. So you could create a column that has a flag if it's not precise, or you could only include data that is precise. So it would give some flexibility to the person developing the mapping in terms of what they want to do with those. And then the other pattern, which I know we talked about a little bit at the Connectathon, that I think might be really useful as functions, is to have earliest instant and latest instant as a FHIR path function you can use to translate the date. So if you have a date that's not a date time, and you set it, you create two columns or one column depending on what you need of earliest and latest, then it becomes really easy to compare to anything else that's generated that way. So if you have a lab result that just has the date but not a date time because of the way the feeds come in from the lab, but you want to compare it to an encounter that has a full date time, then you can, by setting, by treating each date as a range from the earliest possible instance, the latest possible instant, you can definitively say that this happened after this, or this happened before this, or these happened during this particular encounter, like an inpatient visit. And so that's a pretty useful pattern from an analytics perspective. So it might be good to, again, we can see there's different ways to approach this. We've been discussing.
Yeah, but what is your feeling now? So is it belong to the annotation layer or to the view layer?
So I would argue that I think it would be useful in the view layer, because sometimes data might not be coming from it. It might be different in the annotation layer. So if you're operating directly on NDJSON files or on a data source you don't control, then the view transforms can kind of take responsibility for ensuring that you have clean data coming into your flattened tables. And so I guess I think if we go that route, I think there's a lot of value in putting that in the view layer, even if it's a couple more custom FHIR path functions, which we definitely want to be judicious about.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and yeah, I think very well. Yeah, I think your reasoning is sound there, and yeah, I can definitely see the appeal of custom FHIR path expressions judiciously in this space as well. I think they feel like they're justified for dates. Dates are kind of important. So.
Yep.
And dates are terrible to work with for everybody. So I think if anybody looks at that and they're like, oh, they added custom functions for dates, they'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Nobody can handle dates. So I did want to dig into the example that I put together, but I think kind of based on our discussion about reworking, trying a few different approaches to the unnesting, maybe it makes more sense to look at some of those next week, look at some examples before and after, and kind of discuss in that context rather than doing it this week when we're all thinking. Well, I'm sure we all have ideas about other ways of representing that, and maybe more FQL compatible ways, or at least a simpler syntax. So I guess my vote would be to wait on that and plan next week to kind of dig into again on that syntax for the 12th time.
Yeah, for me, it's still important milestone when we will do some implementation, because I feel that we will get a lot of feedback from attempt to implement this stuff. Okay, guys, have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
guys, for
Bye.
FQL.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming by.
No problem.